In the twilight of the 1970s, when Hollywood still carried the scent of its golden past, a man stepped onto the stage at the Golden Globe Awards to accept the prize for Best Actor in a Comedy. That man was Peter Sellers, a performer whose fame had reached its peak with Being There, a film in which he delivered a performance laced with irony and deep humanity. That night marked a high point in his career, followed by an Academy Award nomination. But behind the bright ceremony lights was a far more delicate, troubled story, the story of a man whose life was shaped and ultimately fractured by the very stage that made him famous. Peter Sellers was born in the seaside town of Portsmouth, right in the heart of the King's Theatre. His parents were traveling variety performers, forever drifting from spotlight to spotlight. Just 2 weeks after his birth, they brought him on stage, a gesture that may have been a sign of destiny, or perhaps a curse. In a home where neither peace nor affection stayed for long, Sellers grew up in the wings of theaters, surrounded by anxiety and constant farewells. His parents often left him behind for weeks or even months on tour. His childhood wasn't simply hard, it was fragmented. And it was in these cracks that his delicate, almost glass-like psyche began to take shape. His mother occupied a central and deeply complicated place in his life, a controlling presence to whom Sellers was painfully attached. His close friend Spike Milligan once remarked, "That's not the kind of bond a grown man should have with his mother." Perhaps the roots ran deeper. Peter had been named after an older brother who was stillborn, a child he never knew, yet somehow always followed. Much of his life seemed to be a desperate attempt to prove that he was real, that he wasn't just a substitute or a shadow. After serving in the Royal Air Force during World War II, the shy and introspective Sellers set his sights on the world of radio. And he found a clever way to get an audition at the BBC. He impersonated well-known broadcaster Kenneth Horne in a phone call to a producer. The ruse worked, and with it, the door to show business opened. Soon, Sellers' voice was heard across Britain, joined by those of his future collaborators Spike Milligan and Harry Seckham. Together they created The Goon Show, a surreal, anarchic radio comedy that exploded in popularity in the 1950s. Their humor wasn't just funny. It was wild, subversive, and ahead of its time, paving the way for a generation of comedians, including the minds behind Monty Python. As laughter filled the airwaves, Sellers' personal life followed a more unpredictable script. He married Australian actress and became a father. Then came his move into film, the place where his admiration for actors like Alec Guinness took tangible form. Films like The Lady Killers marked milestones in his rise. Yet behind each success trailed nervous breakdowns, bursts of rage on set, and a constant, aching desire to be understood by himself, by directors, by the world. Peter Sellers was no flawless hero. He was a man constantly at war with himself, wearing masks not only for his roles, but in his everyday life. His characters, Clouseau, Chance, and the many voices he conjured, were endlessly varied, perhaps because he never quite managed to play himself. And that, ultimately, is what makes his story so human and compelling. It's not just the journey of an actor. It's the journey of a man who, sincerely and painfully, tried to figure out who he really was in a world that always expected something from him. The life of Peter Sellers wasn't just a string of roles and career milestones. It was a tragicomedy with touches of the grotesque, where the actor's inner demons were just as vivid as the characters he brought to life. Behind the many masks he wore on stage and screen was a man endlessly searching for love, for approval, for meaning, and slowly losing himself in the process. Sellers burst into the film world with the urgency of someone who knew the time to act was now, even if the moment had long since cooled. On screen, his instincts were razor-sharp. In life, they often failed him. What once came across as charming shyness gradually morphed into deep insecurity. What if I'm not a real actor? What if I'll never make it in Hollywood? He would wonder. But instead of turning to his family for comfort, he looked elsewhere. And each day grew more distant, at times even cruel. In 1960, he accepted a role in The Millionaires, officially out of artistic interest, but as he later admitted, it was really just to be close to Sophia Loren. His infatuation with the dazzling actress crossed every line. Once, he even woke his 6-year-old son in the middle of the night to ask whether he should get a divorce. It was the kind of question better suited to a therapist than a child. When his children couldn't say which parent they loved more, Sellers, disappointed by the wrong answer, told them he didn't want to see them again. The marriage collapsed in 1962, but just as his personal life crumbled like a house of cards, his career took off like a rocket. Audiences fell in love with his portrayal of Inspector Clouseau in The Pink Panther, a character in whom slapstick comedy met a quiet sadness, and absurd gestures masked an oddly touching humanity. Critics compared Sellers to Chaplin and Keaton. He almost single-handedly shaped Clouseau's persona, turning it into his most iconic, enduring creation. But his brilliance extended far beyond The Pink Panther. In Lolita, and especially in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, he revealed extraordinary range. Playing 3 distinct roles in a single film, something few actors could dream of attempting. Sellers respected Kubrick more than most directors, perhaps because Kubrick didn't try to simplify or reshape him. He simply understood him. And yet, the higher Sellers climbed, the darker things became. He developed an obsession with the occult, placing his faith in astrologer Maurice Woodruff and claiming to be guided by the spirit of long-dead comedian Dan Leno. At the height of his fame, his eccentricities became truly alarming. He had a phobia of green and purple, refusing to wear those colors or act near anyone who did. Publicists were forced to vet hotel rooms in advance to ensure they didn't contain the forbidden hues. That was Peter Sellers, a man for whom transformation was not just an art form but a survival mechanism. He hid behind so many masks, he ultimately lost sight of who he was beneath them. And yet, in those strange, hilarious, tender characters he created, something of the real Peter remains. The man who, perhaps, never truly knew who he was without the makeup. Her life was never a gentle path. Only sharp turns, steep climbs, and moments when the ground seemed to vanish beneath her feet. She was young, radiant, a rising Swedish actress filled with hope and wonder about the future. But in a flash, she was swept into the orbit of someone else's brilliance. A whirlwind of obsession, genius, and self-destruction. Britt Ekland met Peter Sellers, and just 10 days later they were married. Some were stunned, others whispered behind closed doors. A 19-year age gap, a rushed decision, an odd pairing. But perhaps the answer lay in that very strangeness, in the magnetic force that defied reason, in a fire that didn't follow the rules. He was a comic legend with tragedy flickering in his eyes. She, a young woman who had only begun to taste freedom. Instead of shared happiness, she found herself in a velvet-lined cage. Sellers became increasingly jealous, suspicious, and controlling. He chose her clothes, demanded she stay by his side at all times. When she landed a role in London, he went so far as to bring in a doctor to declare her too ill to continue filming. The producers fired her immediately, and Britt was left with no job, no independence, and a growing sense of anxiety, trapped with a man whose love and destruction walked hand in hand. Meanwhile, Sellers himself was slipping further from reality. On set, his behavior turned erratic, sharp-edged, irritable, volatile. During the filming of Kiss Me, Stupid, he clashed constantly with director Billy Wilder. Fights, shouting, fits of rage. His inner chaos spilled out in every direction. One night, in a reckless attempt to spark desire, he inhaled amyl nitrite and suffered 8 heart attacks over the course of 3 hours. He somehow survived, but he was dropped from the film, and Wilder, exhausted by his outbursts, showed no sympathy. During production of the chaotic spoof Casino Royale, everything seemed to collapse around him. 6 directors, endless rewrites, a bloated budget, and at the center, an actor unraveling, no longer able to separate comedy from catastrophe. He yearned to be seen as a serious leading man, not a clown, and obsessively rewrote the script, trying to reshape a farce into his own tragic narrative. Orson Welles openly mocked him, and the tension grew so unbearable that they refused to appear in the same scenes together. It all ended with a punch, literally. Sellers struck one of the directors, Joseph McGrath, after yet another clash. Soon after, he walked off the film, leaving his part unfinished. But that only gave him more time to focus on something else, the final, irreversible breakdown of his marriage to Brit. That was his path, from shining star to a man lost in his own storms. And beside him stood a young woman caught in the chaos, her face still untouched by sorrow, but already learning how to hide her tears behind a smile. There was a time in Peter Sellers' life when everything, his career, his health, and his love life, seemed to conspire against him, as if the fragile stage he had always balanced on was finally beginning to give way. At the center of this personal storm stood Swedish actress Britt Ekland, his wife, his muse, and soon, the source of his deepest pain. Their marriage started like a romantic play, beautiful, promising, but Act 2 quickly spiraled into drama. Their shared film projects became battlegrounds, thick with tension and endless arguments. Eventually, Sellers lost his patience and demanded that Ekland be removed from the production. She didn't object. By then, their marriage had unraveled into a parody of itself, where love had long since been replaced by resentment. As if fate wasn't finished with him, Sellers' mother suffered a heart attack during this turbulent period. Overwhelmed by his own pain, he didn't visit her. She died just days later. That moment haunted him. He never forgave himself. Soon after, Ekland filed for divorce. Everything fell apart. Everything except the guilt and despair. The years that followed were marked by poor decisions. On screen, he faced flop after flop. In his personal life, things were even worse. In 1970, feeling time slipping through his fingers, Sellers married 23-year-old model Miranda Corey. The marriage unraveled quickly, and by 1973 it was all but over. But Sellers wasn't done yet. After a performance by Liza Minnelli, the two fell into a whirlwind romance. 3 days later, they were engaged, despite the fact he was still married and she was engaged to someone else. A month later, the passion burned out. All that remained was emptiness and another broken union. Those close to him began to whisper. Was he losing his grip? Had he forgotten where the performance ended and real life began? When invited to appear on The Michael Parkinson Show, he couldn't bring himself to show up as simply Peter Sellers. Instead, he arrived in full Nazi uniform, playing a role, any role, because being himself was too frightening. Still, he kept pushing forward. In the mid-1970s, Sellers returned to the role of Inspector Clouseau in the Pink Panther sequels. Fame, money, acclaim, they came back. But so did the tantrums on set, the diva-like demands, the emotional volatility. The women in his life remained young, while he grew older, more exhausted, more fractured. In 1977, he married for the fourth time, again to a 23-year-old actress Lynn Frederick. She may have endured the worst of him. Biographer Roger Lewis wrote that she suffered more than any of his previous wives. She wasn't prepared for his fury or the darkness inside him. And yet, even amid this chaos, Sellers never lost that flicker of brilliance. In 1979, he landed a role that would later be seen as his swan song, the gentle gardener chants in Being There. He immersed himself fully in the part, shunning publicity, distancing himself from colleagues. He wasn't acting, he was the character. And for once, he managed to show the world not a mask, but a glimpse of his true self, fragile, searching, quietly kind, and deeply tragic. It was his farewell. And somehow, in its strange, bittersweet way, it was beautiful. When stars shine their brightest, it's easy to believe their light will never fade. But life has a way of reminding us, even the most dazzling brilliance can dim. The story of Peter Sellers is one such paradox. A man of extraordinary talent, magnetic charm, and deep inner turmoil. His life played out as a blend of triumph, tragedy, and surreal absurdity. Fame descended on Sellers like an avalanche. His iconic role that earned him a Golden Globe and an Oscar nomination seemed to mark the pinnacle of his career. Universal acclaim from critics and audiences alike. But as often happened in his life, glory was followed by a fall. It was in those quieter, more intimate moments that the cracks became undeniable. After a major film premiere, he nervously asked his 15-year-old daughter Victoria what she thought of the film. With the blunt honesty of a teenager, she replied that she enjoyed it, but added that he looked like a little fat old man. Whether she was joking or not, no one can say. But Sellers exploded. A glass flew in her direction. Then came the order to leave the house immediately. This wasn't just a moment of temper. It was a collapse, the unraveling of a man exhausted by his own demons. His older daughter, Sarah, couldn't stay silent. She confronted him, appalled by his cruelty. His response wasn't remorse, it was distance. He sent her a telegram. That would be the last they'd speak for many years. A shadow fell between them that never truly lifted. Friends pleaded with him to take care of his health. His heart had already suffered multiple attacks. But Sellers ignored the warnings, as if admitting illness meant surrendering control. During a shoot in Dublin, he collapsed on set. Just 2 days later, he was on a plane to Cannes, as though life couldn't be paused for something as inconvenient as mortality. On July 22, 1980, in London, he was preparing for dinner with old friends, members of the legendary comedy troupe, The Goon Show. It was meant to be a reunion after years apart, but it never happened. That same day, in his hotel room, Peter Sellers suffered yet another heart attack. 2 days later, he was gone. He was only 54. Even in death, Sellers left behind one last strange joke. As per his wishes, the song that played at his funeral was Glenn Miller's In the Mood, a tune his friends absolutely despised. It was a farewell wrapped in irony, a final smirk through tears. After his passing, it emerged that he had attempted to change his will, removing his estranged wife Lynn Frederick from the inheritance. But the paperwork was never finalized. In the end, his children each received just £800 from a multi-million-pound estate. The rest went to Lynn, who chose not to share it. His former partner, Britt Eklund, later claimed she believed Sellers suffered from bipolar disorder, but he refused help, rejected diagnoses, and denied any weakness. His life was a constant struggle against the world, against his own image, and, perhaps most of all, against himself. 2 years before his death, he appeared on The Muppet Show. Yet even there, he refused to appear as himself. He hid behind voices, costumes, and characters. When the host gently suggested he just be Peter Sellers, he replied with a shrug, "I can't be myself. You see, there is no me. I once was, but I had it surgically removed." A joke? A cry for help? Perhaps both. Peter Sellers remains in memory not only as a brilliant comic and master of disguise, but also as a man with a broken heart, in every sense. His life was a tragicomedy, a show where behind the clown makeup was a soul quietly slipping away.